Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And Cam, you just got back from Pennsylvania, and I
I did.
want you to know I'm severely disappointed that you didn't stop in.
Yeah, for those that maybe aren't familiar with the state of Pennsylvania, in terms of uh, just geographical distance from one corner going diagonal to the other corner, definitely a learning curve for me when I started at Penn State. And unfortunately, I was on the opposite corner of where Tom was at.
Yeah,
So that probably would have been a
it's
six,
about
7 hour. Everybody talks,
it's about
distance in
12.
Texas.
Yeah, it's about 12,000 miles from one corner to the other. It's
Hey, let me tell you, it feels like it. And honestly, if you take that Pennsylvania Turnpike, it you might as well drive the 12,000 miles because the cost that your state wants to get to fix that road,
oh yeah,
oof, that that turnpike. I took the more scenic route down through West Virginia, and actually on the way down had the opportunity to stop in and talk with the small ruminant club down there at WVU that they just started this year, and so had some really good conversation with some young people that are really energetic about the sheep industry. A lot of pre-vet students, a lot of a few industry individuals, and so for me it was very encouraging just to kind of see what the future of the industry is, and just some young people that are excited, whether it's vet school or working on the industry side of sheep production. So yeah, that scenic route, the sun hitting those leaves through those rolling hills of Western Maryland, I couldn't ask for better weather or a better view
yeah.
throughout there. So it was a good trip. We were out there, you mentioned it. So we were out, it was our last targeted grazing workshop focused on solar grazing. And uh, we were, I think I mentioned on here, ALB, American Land Board, did three this year. So Texas, North Carolina, and then Pennsylvania. And then there's a slug of them coming next year, all over the US. So we're excited to get that content out, but a really good group of sheep producers, individuals that are looking to expand the sheep industry. And we had a lot of questions around there. Quite a few just solar discussions and a couple of solar developers that made the trip out for the training, and it was good. One of the topics that came up, increasing productivity. We know if we want to increase our sheep population in the US, it's going to take more females to do that, and we have to grow. And one of the topics that today we're going to talk about is breeding our ewe lambs and
Yep.
improving some of that reproductive performance in those sheep. So, on that note, Tom, is that something that you're choosing to do, getting those ewe lambs bred as lambs so that they lamb at that yearling stage? And kind of why are you choosing to do that?
Well, for one thing, our lamb crop is always better than the ewes they came out of. So it's always the ewes. We're always you're super excited about those ewe lambs, wanting to see how they're going to mature, and just from a numbers point of view, they through NSIP they should be pretty good ewes, and they should produce pretty good offspring. But we want to see those lamb at a year of age, mostly because I'm impatient. I hear a lot of people wait until they're 18 months. I don't think you need to wait that long at all. I think if you can lamb them out at a year of age, I think you're perfectly fine. One of the other things too is I hear a lot of people talk about those lambs. They worry about stunting their growth. I'm not too concerned about that. Don't want super small sheep, but I don't want great big giant sheep either. So if that is going to stunt their growth somewhat, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if you don't want great big giant sheep. But and I hear all kind of numbers floated around as to what those lambs should weigh before you breed them.
Yeah, what's the number that you've heard?
I've heard anywhere from 60 to 80% of mature growth.
Yeah, and I've heard
But
80,
how do you
the
know?
top end of that range. I've heard 80 quite a bit. I think that's pretty significant. If you're breeding at 80% of what their mature weight's going to be, those are pretty decent sized ewe lambs. 70% of that average mature weight, I think we're fine. If it's 50%, you got to think if Tom's mature ewes are weighing 140 pounds, 130 pounds, that's a 65 to 70 pound lamb.
Yeah,
That one's probably too small.
yeah.
But as we increase, our conception rates are going to increase as well. If we increase that body weight, conception rates are going to increase. And so I guess, is there a number or percentage that you're shooting for? Is there a weight that you just say, oh, if they hit this weight, I feel comfortable exposing them?
Not really. Quite honestly, we look at some of them and say, "Oh, those are just way too small." And so we just move them back out, and they get a chance maybe in the next round or maybe 6 months from then. Just kind of depends on the time of year. I've got a handful now that were really small, and I don't expect them to grow well through the winter months. But I think come spring, they'll kind of turn on and go pretty good. But we get some that are kind of iffy. We're not really sure whether they're big enough or not. We'll put those in with a ram anyhow. And I've yet to have a ewe lamb get bred that was entirely too small to produce. And so I kind of
To
feel like,
sustain
yeah,
that pregnancy.
yeah, I kind of feel like if they're that small, they're just not going to cycle, kind of a deal.
Yeah, and I think too, we think, can they get bred? And the answer a lot of times is yes. And it's less carrying that lamb to term and more, are they prepared to feed that lamb and carry it through lactation? Can
Mhm.
they themselves hold up over the course of that, let's say a 60-day lactation period, and come out on the other side and not be uh, so nursed down that we have some problems maybe getting them to rebreed shortly after. I also think, we talk about your breeding scheme, and that's come up pretty frequently. The nice thing, if we're lambing in an annual system, and when I say annual system, specifically just one time a year, not
Yep.
only for the sheep, but for the operation. If I say I'm lambing in April and that's it, I'm not lambing again until April of the following year. Well, I think I have more incentive or more pressure to get those ewe lambs to breed in the month of November. I need a higher percentage of ewe lambs to conceive in November, in December, because they're going to be two when they lamb for the first
Yep.
time if they don't hit on that first cycle. If we take a look kind of what Tom's doing and lambing 3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year in the future. Well, if we expose some ewe lambs, and I think you're probably going to turn the ram in here shortly, but if we expose some of those ewe lambs in November and say we get 60% to conceive in a pretty short window, pretty tight breeding cycle, and maybe 1, 2 heat cycles, the ones that don't breed, well, guess what? Maybe we can put a cedar in those and lamb those out in the fall. Yeah, they're lambing at 18 months of age. But maybe those ewe lambs, as Tom had mentioned, need some more time. Maybe we can get them to that body weight that would be more acceptable. And we have a market and an option for those sheep that aren't kind of fitting in the window that we've placed them in initially. And so there are some advantages to that, especially when we think of uh, growing the flock and increasing flock numbers. That tends to be an option, those rollover situations. Now there will be a lot of producers and a lot of operations that'll tell you, well, if they didn't breed, if they didn't make it to this point and they can't breed at a year of age, they're probably not worth keeping. And if Tom was at his final number, maybe that is what you would say. Hey, if you can't conceive at this body weight, at this time of year, I don't need you. Let's move you as a yearling and sell you to a commercial operator. Nothing wrong with those ewe lambs. I don't think they need to go straight into the freezer for a lot of people, but for your operation, maybe it doesn't work. So, I guess what's your philosophy on that, and how do you use those different lambing windows to maybe keep sheep around, or just become more flexible with how you're managing those young females?
Yeah, I think because of those lambing windows, i- if I was just lambing once a year, it would be difficult to justify keeping those for a whole nother year. Uh, just to lamb them out again, or lamb them out for the first time at 2 years of age. So typically, everything that's born in February, we don't have a hard time getting those lambs up to weight, getting them bred to lamb at a year of age in February. It seems like our April May lambs, those are the ones we have the harder time getting to weight so that they can lamb again for the first time in April, May. A lot of those end up getting carried over, and I don't know quite what the difference is. A part of it is because we're not feeding those ewes as long. We're getting back out on pasture, so they're not getting the extra supplement that they'd be getting if they were in the barn. Um, we just tried some creep feeding last year. That made a big difference in those February lambs, whereas those April lambs, they got a little bit of that, but not for near as long as the others did. And so those are the ones that we tend to end up holding over breeding for a fall lambing group. And kind of the bonus to that is we're not waiting until they're a full 2 years old. They're closer to that, what, be 16, 17 months, maybe 18 months. And we seem like we get more twins out of those first timers that
Mm.
doing that than we do the other. And so I think it could pay off. I think it could pay off just because you're not waiting a whole year. You're only waiting maybe that extra 5 or 6 months to get those to lamb.
And the other aspect, if we kind of dig a little bit deeper on that, we lamb in the fall. We know our market is strong January, February.
Hmm.
Well, if that lamb not only has a offspring, has a lamb, but maybe they have multiples, and that'd be kind of interesting to dig through some of your Excel sheets and uh, just records and see, if we lamb at 18 months, are we seeing an uptick in lambing percentage? We get those lambs out the door. Well, if they're worth $3 a pound versus $2 a pound
Yep.
from our spring group, uh, does that go into the consideration of kind of making some of that investment of our feed and our time back? I think that's a wonderful thing to kind of look at, especially as I mentioned on the growth of the operation side of things. If we're expanding, not getting rid of those females for some of those reasons, and again, it's fitting it to the operation. If you've got 100 ewes and you want to stick at 100 ewes, are we going to suggest that you keep the ones that aren't breeding? By no means are
Nope.
we are we saying that. But if you're in that expansion phase, as many of us are, uh, it makes sense to keep some of those elite females back that maybe just couldn't get it done for that first time of exposure. When you think about exposing those ewe lambs for the first time, is there anything on the ram selection side of it that you pay attention to, or is it? Have you had any issues with the type of sheep that you've been raising?
We haven't had any issues. We are looking at birth weights in that NSIP. And obviously, we don't want that very small, but we don't want that very big either. So we're just kind of staying in the middle. I haven't had any issue at all with first timers having lambs. Um, and in the Catawba world, I've only ever had one ewe that didn't want to take care of her lamb. I thought that was
Hmm.
I I, I think it's a testament to the breed, the mothering ability of those ewes. Um, it is crazy to see how quickly that mothering instinct kicks in on those ewe lambs, how quickly they start in. I think the biggest thing we notice is that when I go out to a pen and there's new lambs there, I pick those lambs up and I start walking, and that ewe will just immediately start to follow you, unless she's a first timer. Then you can see she wants to follow those lambs, but she wants nothing to do with me.
Right.
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 And so there's a battle there. But you can tell that instinct's there and they really want it. But I suppose that I probably wouldn't do terminal sires on those, um, because I'd be concerned because those lambs typically are bigger, especially if you were doing something like a Texel where they've got that, that much bigger head. Um, I'd really be paying attention to that. And I do know there are Texels with that have much more breeding ease, I guess it's called, where the shape of that head's a little bit different, so it's not that big blocky head. I've read about that several times. I've never owned a Texel, so I don't know the difference in that. I have
Yeah.
read. No, this
And
book.
that is true, and that does exist. And I may catch some flack for this, but if I have to raise Texels where I select against breed character, and for the sake of some of those production things,
Yeah,
I might as well raise some Dorsets, because right now Mount Hope's going to pay me $4 to $5 a pound for them anyway, whether
yeah,
they're Texels or Dorset lambs.
yeah,
So that's again, this is a little bit of a side tangent, but if I'm going to raise terminal sires, they're going to look like terminal sires, and again, it's not a great philosophy, and it's not for everybody, but you do feel like the club calf breeder from the 90s, early 2000s, where they say if they don't come out the side, they're probably not big enough to win a
yeah,
big show.
yeah,
And again, that's an extreme statement,
yeah,
and that's not our breeding philosophy. But we're not going to sacrifice masculinity for lambing ease, because we're using them on top of maternal sheep
yep,
that need carcass quality. And the furthest I can push out that terminal shape and terminal attributes that I'm selecting for, the further I pull that crossbred animal. And I that was a great point though on, am I going to take my ewe lambs and expose them to a Texel? We don't have the data to show that in those first time lambers that there's a lambing ease issue. The data on the mature ewes, on mature hair type ewes, there's no issue with dystocia, lambing issues of that kind. On first timers, is that kind of a common sense situation? I think most definitely.
yeah,
Uh, and that's where, testament to the breed, as you mentioned, along with, I'd even throw polypays into that mix. Sheep that have been selected pretty intensively on the maternal attributes and maternal traits. We tend to see less dystocia, fewer lambing issues in those breeds, in those first timers. Uh, I know on the blackface side of things, and breeding sheep in general, some of those purebred breeds. If you go in and ask a question of, do you breed sheep to lamb at 13, 12 to 15 months of age, or do you wait till they're lambing at close to 2 years of age? You might split the room
yeah,
with people that say, "Oh, it's not worth all the labor and death loss and dystocia that goes into lambing first timers at 12 to 15 months of age." And you might have a couple of guys that say, like, "Oh yeah, I've got to get that lamb out when they're 12 to 15 months of age, or else I'm just sitting on a sheep for 2 years before I get anything out of it." I think when we move to the maternal breed side of things, and certainly production sheep, more production focused sheep and breeds operations, we know that we can't wait. The longer you hold on to that sheep, the more investment you have into that sheep, the longer it's going to take to get it out of it. And that's just something that it kind of depends the world you live in, and the business design that you have to construct around your operation. But I do think it trends more to the lambing when they're yearlings, when they're 12 to 15 months of age, when we're talking our commercial hair sheep, our commercial polypays, those white face crosses. And that's something that isn't surprising or shouldn't be surprising to a lot of us. The other thing I wanted to mention, when you think ewe lamb development, and we've talked a little bit about that, but when you're developing ewe lambs specifically to lamb at 12 to 15 months of age, do you manage those sheep differently? And I guess what does your nutrition planning look like for those sheep?
It doesn't look any different than the rest of the flock.
Okay.
It really doesn't. Those
Yeah.
we wean those lambs, um, somewhere between that 60 and 90 days. Sometimes it goes a little longer than that. But those lambs just we move those ewes to a different pasture. Those lambs are in that same pasture, and we just keep rotating them daily. And about 30 days later, we'll pull those ewe lambs out of that group and put those ewe lambs back in with the main flock. And that's it. They're just going to be
And
moved with the main flock until
yeah.
there's no
Yeah, and so what you're describing is after you wean those ewe lambs off, you do separate them for a little bit to actually
Yep.
wean them from their mothers. About 30 days, they're grazing on their own. Are you providing any creep or supplementation during that phase?
Nope. We haven't yet.
Okay.
Keep talking
Okay,
about it.
and then
We haven't done it yet.
okay. And then putting them back in with the ewes. And really, when you think about pasture rotations, do I want to be managing, especially, if I'm rotating 3 to 5 days versus, yeah, I don't want a bunch of different rotations.
Yep.
If I'm rotating every day, I definitely don't want a bunch of different rotations. And all of a sudden, my two rotations turn into three, turn into four, turn into
Yep.
five. And if I can consolidate, and I think there is some value without getting too far into the weeds, some value at getting those ewe lambs back in to that grazing environment and that experiential learning with those ewes in this is how we're grazing, and kind of teaching them that this is your role here on this farm. This is how we manage, and the ones that aren't cutting it in that phase are the ones that probably aren't going to cut it long term,
Yeah.
unless we have some environmental pressures, some issues that are coming up uh, that maybe are outside of that specific management. But no, I think the only reason I asked on the nutrition side, and by no means saying that, I think what Tom just described is a very practical philosophy and thought process um, in managing ewe lambs to that time of exposure. Now, when you are breeding those mature ewes earlier than your ewe lambs, correct?
No, not necessarily. If pretty much if you land in February, she's probably going to get bred in February again. And
Okay.
if if there's ewe lambs there that were born in February, they're going to get put in that same group.
Okay. And the reason I had asked is because you're operating with uh, multiple lambing groups. There's a lot of producers that, maybe those ewes out on grass aren't kind of hitting that body size that we'd like to see in the time frame that we have them out there. So maybe if they lamb in February, or if they're born in February, maybe we lamb them in April at 14 months of age, maybe closer to 15 months of age, depending on they were born early February and lamb late April. That's something that I know when we started with uh, hair sheep, and we were even doing it on the blackface weather type sheep. They would lamb in January, and we'd take those January lambs and we would breed them for March lambs, breed them in October, and just give them a little more time to develop. Again, I don't know that we've operated enough numbers in that system to say, oh, the ones that lamb at 15 months of age are returned uh, to that following breeding season in better condition or are better moms, at 2 months older when they lamb. I don't have that data, but if it's a size issue, maybe you're running into, that could certainly be an option. And
Yeah.
same as you mentioned, Tom, with your late borns, those April born lambs, maybe we hold them over until the spring of the following year and we lamb them out at 18 months of age. Again, that's for each of those, like your own operation to figure out, but can certainly be something to work around, maybe some of those lower conception rates, along with just making sure those sheep get to where they need to be before exposure. On the nutrition side of things, the other reason I had asked is when we think about conception rates, there's some pre-existing data that's out there, along with I know a number of research projects that are being conducted now. And as we increase plane of nutrition going into those ewe lambs, we increase conception rate on those first time ewe lambs. And so, really, do I want to feed my ewes? We've talked about flushing, so maybe the answer is yes. To flush those ewes, we might want to feed them before breeding season, but around or year round feeding of those ewes, I really don't want to have the feed bucket out in front of them. I'd rather put them on some grass that Tom had just mentioned for as long of a time period as possible. But when we think about growth rate and efficiency of that feed going into an animal, those ewe lambs should, with proper genetic selection, should have pretty significant growth potential. And it might be dependent on your operation what significant is. Is it half a pound per day? Is it close to a pound a day? Is it three-quarters of a pound a day? If we can get into even a half a pound per day on the low end, with some concentrate feeding, we feed them for 60 days and we've added 30 pounds. Well, all of the sudden, when we weaned a 60-pound lamb, if I can put another 30 pounds on her and 30 pounds of skeletal tissue, muscle, not necessarily adipose or fat tissue, because we want to be careful on those ewe lambs and not getting them too fat, because that causes reproductive issues long term for us as well. But if I can get them up to 90 pounds, all of the sudden that 70% to 80% body weight that Tom mentioned early, we're knocking on the door uh, for that 75% of mature body weight. And that might be 60 days. We're not ready to breed them yet. We still have a couple more months. And
Yeah.
so if we can get additional gain going on to those ewe lambs from pasture after we feed for that short period of time, does it set us up for improved success on conception rate?
Yeah. See, I think that's what we gain is just because we're out there on grass. I still think they make weight. They just grow maybe a little slower than they would if they were in a grain-based system. I still think for
Right.
the most part we hit that mark and it's not a big deal. It's always just a handful that didn't that we call them dinks. They're not necessarily dinks, but they just didn't quite make the weight we want them to be. And then there's always a few that we think should have bred that didn't, and we'll typically hang on to those and move to that next group. But I don't know. We're getting ready to go pull blood today. It's today's a crazy sheep day. We should be burying
Yeah.
water line, but we're gonna do sheep all day instead of burying water line. But because the water line doesn't pay the bills, but the sheep do, so we gotta take care of them first. But there'll be a bunch of lambs in there. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how many are gonna be in that group, but it'll be interesting to see how many of those are gonna be confirmed bred after we pull blood in those. And I've got a bunch of small lambs out there too that we didn't do a real good job record keeping. Is just as we were sorting through, we just said, "No, that's too small. That's too small. That's too small."
Mm.
Kept pushing them outside, and didn't necessarily get those numbers written down. But we'll go through. We'll scan that whole pasture flock today, and we'll know exactly what's there. But my guess is that those are gonna probably end up being bred for fall lambs. And it's funny too because I tend to think of all our breeding stock is really common in that February group, and then there'll be some in that April group. But I always think of the fall group as pretty much they're gonna be heading for Mount Hope.
Yeah, just because the value that we talked about earlier. And I
Yeah,
think that's not a terrible kind of thought process. And some may disagree that maybe those falls should be where you're keeping your ewe lambs out of,
yeah,
or some of that seed stock out of. We know they're easier to sell it at that increased age and size the following year. But if that February group ends up being most of your replacement females, well, what's the April group turn into? Well, maybe the April group turns into sheep that you're selecting for commercial production, or
yeah,
sheep that you're going to sell ewe lambs out of, knowing that conception rates for you are lower in that lambing at a year of age. The nice thing is, what I think is really fun is being able to manipulate kind of what your marketing decision is, and it's different from every lambing point. It's
yeah,
different from every kind of what we'd call production cycle as it shifts around the calendar. And so identifying what works best, for you is, and for all of us, is what we're tasked with, as opposed to just throwing the ram out and saying, "Oh, well, we're going to get sheep out of here and hopefully it works." So
yeah. That
that's
that fall.
that's exciting.
I think with that fall group, part of the thinking is I could really hammer those. I could push those pretty hard. And January, February, I could be selling those lambs and trying to capitalize on that price difference. And where I feel like if I'm going to keep those all the way through to breed them so they lamb out of the year of age, there's a whole lot more cost involved in that because we have a whole lot less grass. We're going to have to feed a whole lot more hay. We're going to have to feed a whole lot better quality hay, or we're going to have to feed
Right. Right.
because we just don't have that quality of grass to grow those lambs through the winter months.
Yeah. And unfortunately, our spring group ended up very much like a fall group that you're
Yeah.
talking about, when you don't have rain and you put them on hay. We fed ewe lambs harder this year than I've fed sheep in probably 8 years. I just really putting some weight on them. They looked absolutely beautiful, and I'm excited to see, what does this do for our conception rates? And I call it making lemonade out of lemons, because it not a great situation, but uh, the sheep look fantastic. Those ewe lambs look fantastic, and uh, is it something we're going to try to do next year? No, I really want to get them out on grass and
Yeah.
and move them through and grow them the way that I would like them to grow. But not gonna lie, they're fun to look at when they're fleshy and
Oh, yeah.
just very attractive females that have a lot of value seed stock commercially. And I know genetically they're going to get out and work, because their moms have been doing that. Previous full siblings have been doing that, uh, in the years past. So it's kind of fun. We're not pulling sheep out of a feedlot and asking them to go work in a different environment, except for this year where we are. But
Yeah.
genetically, they should hold up to the demands in the future.
Yep. So it'll be fun to see what this blood work comes back and says. And we have pretty dry summer, but things still seem to grow pretty well. My ewes are just fat as ticks. It's
Yeah.
kind of crazy how fat they are. And it's been so dry here for so long. We just had another big storm come through the other night. Wind picked up.
Missed you.
Yep, and completely missed us. Not
Yep. I told
no
someone
raw.
told someone the other day, I hate to say it, but we need as much snow as we can possibly get this winter, just to try to bring up, where that deficit is at.
Oh,
Try to bring up that water table. And get some moisture into the ground, and hopefully next year we're not faced with it. But there's a lot of things that we take for granted every year, and now we can be very, very thankful for the moisture that we do get in
Yeah,
years to come.
well, it's November. It's the month we're supposed to be really thankful. So we'll
It's
see.
true. That is true.
See how that goes. I don't know. Everybody's taking corn off right now, saying it's nice and dry. That's a
Oh
good thing.
yeah. Yep. Save their money on propane running those
Yep,
dryers.
those dryers, and they should be getting a little better price for their corn because they're not being docked for the moisture in it.
Yeah. They may not be getting docked for the moisture, but the price to start out with is
Pretty bad.
abysmal,
Yeah, it
which
is.
from someone that buys their corn and isn't raising it,
That's a good thing.
you're not going to hear me complain. But I do have sympathy for those
Yeah,
that have to sell at a break even or below type price.
we are
So,
we are grateful for those people.
yep.
Yeah. Well, it's been good catching up with you. Um, if you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to me at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. There's a Facebook page, there's a YouTube channel. We're slowly getting those on there. And so we're gonna be bleeding sheep today, and the goal is to not cuss and swear the entire day. So we'll see how
There you go.
that so at least we'll get the dog out and use him a little bit today. That'll be fun.
Yeah. Do you have him working a needle and blood tube yet?
No, I don't know what
Ah,
he has no opposable thumbs. I think that's the biggest
yeah,
problem.
okay. That would make it hard. That
Now,
makes
if
sense.
I let him, he could draw blood on every sheep.
Oh,
But
great. Great.
no. All right. Well, it's been fun talking to you, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Sounds good, Tom. Have a good one.
All right. Bye.